Evening and a very warm welcome to all of you. Today, we are gathered here for the World Sustainable Development Summit 2021. And the agenda and the theme for the summit is redefining our common future, safe and secure environment for all. A very apt theme just after we are moving to get out of the pandemic. This happens to be the first plenary session of the summit, and we have had in the morning almost 10 different discussions as thematic tracks. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to this very interesting fire chat, which is titled Transitioning to Zero Emissions, a conversation on industry, finance, and policy. And this is a very different kind of a platform, a conversation on how we can support green growth and accelerate a sustainable transition. Accelerating economic growth and achieving this requires coordination between multiple stakeholders, as well as receiving popular acceptance. To delve into this, we have a set of very interesting speakers who actually will look into all these aspects. And we welcome our distinguished speakers who are Ambassador Manjeev Puri, a former Indian diplomat, Mr. Manish Chaurasia, Managing Director and CEO, Tata Cleantech Capital, Mr. Erik Solheim, former Minister of International Development and Minister of Environment in Norway, Mr. Björn Stigson, Chairman, Stigson and Partners. Before the session begins, I would like to briefly mention that all of the distinguished speakers today have had a major role in the success of this platform. Mr. Chaurasia, it was the Tata Group and its leadership which provided the strength to host our first summit. It believed in TERI's ability to put together a global platform. Subsequently, more partners joined, but it was Norway that partnered the summit for over a decade. And we truly enjoyed Mr. Solheim's presence through many of these years. Mr. Stigson, as chairman of the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, partnered the first summit in 2001 and supported the summit as long as he led the World Business Council. It was his vision to bring in business leaders into the discussion of global importance. And finally, it is the External Affairs Ministry that provides all the support when we bring together thought leaders from across the world. And Ambassador Manjeev Puri, your personal support has been pivotal through the years. With this, I hand over the floor virtually to you, Sir Ambassador, and request you to take over the fireside chat. Over to you, Mr. Manjeev Puri.
Annapurna, thank you very much. And thank you so very much for those kind words. Friends from all over the world, climate, sustainable development, energy activists. Look, I'm very proud today to be here at an event which is starting, in fact, what will result in the formal inauguration by the Honorable Prime Minister of India in an hour or so from now, and then a ministerial roundtable which features the Honorable Minister of External Affairs for India and several other leading dignitaries in the world. But I want to thank you, Annapurna, and I'm delighted to see Director General of TERI, Dr. Ajay Mathur, has also joined us. Ajay, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and to the entire team and the Chairman of TERI, Dr. Nitin Desai. Friends, to introduce myself, maybe for several years I was out of this scene. I retired as India's ambassador to Nepal last year. I was the ambassador to the European Union before that. But I have spent many years being involved with the discussions on sustainable development and climate change in particular, especially when I was dealing with the United Nations. So this is a very special honor for me and to get back into this mold. Annapurna, to you and to your team, to Dr. Mathur, my very special thanks.
Thank you.
Now, I want to tell everyone that it is quite cold in Delhi. And I don't know, sir, how it is in Norway and Sweden. Mumbai, perhaps, Mr. Chaurasia, is a little warmer. You perhaps have a little bit of air conditioning on. But I want to tell you, I don't have a fireside kind of on here or a fireplace blazing, but I do have a heater next to me. Because frankly, at age 60, I do feel a little cold. And I'm feeling good with the heater there. So I'm very delighted to be moderating a fireside chat because I frankly think, yes, that's also part and parcel of what's going on. In India, of course, many of you would have noticed, we just the other day, and in fact, it's an ongoing major disaster in India, in the upper reaches in Uttarakhand. And so climate, in a sense, is very much something which is in the forefront of everybody's eyes in the newspapers today, in the front pages. Not a particularly good thing why it's happening, but the fact that climate is very important. And Annapurna mentioned to you various things that India has been doing about resilience, about adaptation, their importance. So in a sense, this WSDS comes at a time when, yes, there is a extremely heightened, for a very wrong reason, the nature and the importance of what climate sustainable development means for all of us. Mr. Stigson, Annapurna spoke to me about you. Of course, she said what she said just now, that you were the original partner. But she said something else which has stuck with me. She said that you were the person who said that if you don't involve business, then the only community in the world which touches the lives of every human being in every country in the world will not be involved with your endeavors, since it is only business which does from aircraft to matchsticks and which does it in every part of the world. So what you did as the boss of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development is something that remains with us. And if today we are talking about things such as corporate social responsibility, the involvement of the corporate, the UN Global Compact, so many other aspects that we are talking about, in a sense, it was you who gave birth to each of these. And I don't know how to say a very big thank you to you on behalf of everyone in the sustainable development community worldwide. Annapurna, you mentioned Mr. Eric Soline. For people like me and my generation, he's Mr. World Environment. And there are several reasons why he is that. It isn't simply that he was the executive director of UNEP for a short while. It isn't because he was the Minister of International Development and the Minister of Environment in Norway, but it is because he has been in the forefront of both sustainable development, environmental consciousness, and let me say something else which many people would not have noticed. How to draw the developing world into the world of development and growth. He chaired the OECD's committee for a long time, which dealt with issues that we used to call aid, now we call partnerships. And that's what has made the huge difference. Mr. Chaurasia, I want to say something, not just about the Tata Group, that's wonderful, but I want to say something about your company. If I'm not mistaken, are you not the first sort of what you call the green bank in India? And I want to say something. I think people in India have come to the conclusion that perhaps nothing matters as much as an environment led by businesses in which green sustainability, climate consciousness remains, which is, let me say, the tuning of it all. It becomes incentivized as a result, because no amount of incentivization as a result of laws, legal frameworks, etc., have that longevity as comes as a result of what gets done by markets. And in this, I think my country, India, your country, Mr. Chaurasia, we really need to, let me say, buck up a lot. And it shall be my effort to not only draw things out of you, but also to use you as a resource person, along with our two friends who are really experts and experienced in this, on what can we do in terms of green, financing green, both debt as well as equity. So I am particularly delighted to have this panel. It's a set of people from whom I believe I can learn, and I hope I can coax them to say a lot more interesting as we go through this fireside chat. Annapurna, of course, because you're using two channels and I am not privy to what is happening in the big channel where people are watching, we will remain beholden to you and your colleagues for letting us know what's happening in the chats on that side and what are the questions that keep coming up. I want to just make one or two brief points on my side to you, sir. In a sense, it is very fortuitous that we are having this WSDS now in the month of February of 2021, because whether we like it or not, the global climate changed in the month of November 2020. I don't know what would have been the mood among all of us had we been in a situation which would have been different, and I don't have to spell out the reasons. But I think we need to understand that the largest economy in the world is quite geared and wedded to the answers of climate change and sustainable development. And I think this is a welcome augury for all of us. I know that all of you come from Europe, an extremely leading light and leading sound in the area and leading action in the area of sustainable development and climate. We in India are very proud of what we've done. I come from a time when most of you, sir, used to feel very happy looking at me and saying, you know, here comes the naysayer. But look what happened in 2015. I dare say, but for India's activism, it may not have been such a lot of smooth sailing. And we not only signed on to the Paris Accord, but we have been an aggressive and strong proponent. Look what we've done in solar energy. It's not just that we set up the International Solar Alliance, but we have ensured that today in India, solar power has reached a point that during daylight hours, it is the cheapest form of electricity. We are committed and wedded to the idea of increasing the share of renewables in our electric supply system. We have moved tremendously forward in terms of electric vehicles. And we are doing all that we can as a country which really has miles to go in terms of its development quotient in doing what we can. What we need now are partnerships and we need collaboration. My own favorite expression, we need green, that is growth with renewable energy, enterprise, and wedded to nature. With this, let me say that I have gotten over the little time that I had to say a few words. The ground rules of our chat are that I would request each of you, Mr. Stigson, Mr. Eric Solheim, and Mr. Chaurasia, to use about 6-7 minutes to make an opening statement. Thereafter, we will start feeding questions from people in the various chat groups which are aligned here, and I shall try and channel them across to you. And if by any chance those don't seem to be coming through in a cascading manner right at the beginning, I shall try myself to energize you with something or the other. Now, I have, of course, one question for each of you, which I think is particularly important. And I could say that question, and I will say it to you, so that you kind of focus even your coming 6 months on this particular area. Mr. Stigson, for you, what I would ask is really action. For you, Mr. Chaurasia, my ask will be really in the area in which you are perhaps India's pioneer and only player, which is how do we pay for it? And Mr. Solheim, after all, you are a public leader. And to you, my question will have to be, what do we do in terms of public policy? And what do we do in terms of what politicians think they can manage to sell to the people? So we will start this. And let me say, Mr. Stigson, I would request you as, in a sense, the co-founder of WSDS and all of this, to start off this fireside chat, to make your first intervention with about 6-7 minutes. And my question to you really is, what are the kinds of actions as a business that would help achieve the zero emissions, the goal that everyone is looking for? Do you anticipate there being additional benefits for operation, supply chains, and end consumers? So let me just take a second, repeat it. What are the kind of actions that you think business can take to contribute towards truly reducing GHG emissions? And do you think that additional benefits would flow for operations, supply chains, as well as end consumers as a result of that? Sir, the floor is yours, Mr. Stigson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I hope I'm being heard properly.
Very much.
And thank you for the invitation to join this conversation on the crucial issue of transitioning the energy system and address climate change. As you heard from Annapurna, I was president of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and I came to be quite involved with Dr. Pachauri from the start. I recognize the importance of India's role for bringing the emerging economies into addressing the global sustainable development agenda and the leadership and inspiration that I felt Dr. Pachauri could provide. We realize today that transforming the energy system is a must. And we realize today that we're all in this together. But we also see the challenges in making this happen. Because there will be winners and losers in this transition by countries and individual actors, and we need policies for how to deal with this situation. The role of actors, policymakers, financiers, and business are different, but the actors must interact. We must work together to deal with this. So what are the roles of business that I represent? Well, business is a major implementer for energy transformation. Business is the one that is driving resource efficiency. Business is working very much to green the supply chain because we believe that the world's markets will, in the future, ask for resource efficient, low polluting solutions. And if you cannot deliver those type of products and services, you're out. And the same thing actually goes for countries. If you as a country cannot provide resource efficient, low polluting products and services to the world, you will not export. And there is a green race going on now between countries who will be the leaders in this green race. I have my views on who are in this leadership, but I'm not going to say at this point. Business is also reporting on our actions on energy transition and climate. But I would say that one thing that is very important for business is that constructive cooperation with other parts of society. And I would like especially to stress that from policymakers, business needs supporting policies for our actions. We cannot do things that is impossible because of the policies in different countries and regions. But to get to this point, we need from business to improve our risk management and reporting on our actions and the outcome of what we do. Regarding financiers, I see them as part of business, and they provide financial support for the transition. However, they need also to strengthen their risk management and demand transparency from lenders for their risk management. We invest as individuals our pension money by the banks, and the banks have a big responsibility to keep this safe. I'd like to stress that to be successful in addressing climate change, we need much better systems thinking than what we have at the moment about the design and functioning of the energy system. And I've seen few very good examples of this system thinking, both internationally and in countries. We need better cooperation between all the key actors on climate change. We're all in this together. We succeed or fail together. I'm looking forward to the conversation here today. Mr. Chairman, I haven't quite thought how to answer your question. And maybe I could park the answer until the other panelists have had a chance to give their initial comments, and then we can discuss. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for addressing this. Global business is today quite engaged in this matter. And we are engaged because of very good business reasons. Because if we are not engaged and we deliver the solutions that consumers and others are asking for, we will simply be out of business in the future. Thank you.
Mr. Stigson, thank you very much. And I'm quite happy for you to mull over what you'd like to speak in terms of concrete things that business can do and in terms of co-benefits which may accrue to them. I think you've raised some very interesting points in your opening statement. One of the things that you said is something that you've been, I believe, saying for the last 20 years, which is, we used to say this, that, move up or shove off. But you really have said it, that green up or you're out of business. And there is going to be no other way out. The competition for greening is a competition that will have to be played, and it's something that everyone, especially businesses, will realize. India has seen some extraordinary developments in this field. The whole world is gaga about electric traction, especially motor vehicles. Mr. Musk and his electric vehicles. We're very happy that some of that is coming to India. Now, this is, of course, partly as a result of who we are, the kind and size of our economy. But for me also, I think it's a testimony that we are ready and willing and happy to be part of this transition. And so many of you and your friends in the business circles, the ideas that they bring to fore is an economy here which feels good about wanting to be in this. Mr. Chaurasia, no one could speak about Indian business better than you. Certainly not me, a full-time bureaucrat who's now in the think tank area. So let me ask you, let's hear your thoughts, but do tell us, where is the money going to come from? And what do we do? And we'll ask you more questions about money later on, but do touch upon this. The floor is yours, Mr. Chaurasia.
Thank you, Mr. Puri. Thanks for the kind introduction. I'll briefly introduce Tata Cleantech Capital. Tata Group needs no introduction, but Tata Cleantech Capital is relatively a new Tata company. So I'll briefly introduce that. And then I'll answer this very important question, where the money will come from. So Tata Cleantech Capital, as you said, is the first private sector green investment bank, not only in India, but in the entire world, engaged in climate finance and advisory services. We are 80% held by Tata and 20% by IFC. Since our inception in 2013, we have funded about 230 projects in the clean tech sector. And in the process, we have funded capacity worth about 8 gigawatts. And as per our calculation, this would have saved the emission of about 11 million tons of CO2 per annum. We are working very hard on mainstreaming the climate finance in India. And some of the things we have done is that we have partnered with the Green Climate Fund, which has been formed under the aegis of World Bank, to develop the solar rooftop market in India. Apart from that, we have also recently raised some money with some CDC for promoting the electrical vehicle sector in India and other energy efficiency sectors. We have also done a number of advisory assignments with the World Bank, with GIZ and other institutions. So clearly, we are looking at creating an ecosystem through which the money can be channelized into India. And also an ecosystem can be created for making the cleantech projects more fundable. Now, the very important question which you have raised is that how will all this be financed? So the first point which I want to make is that climate change is a global problem and it requires global cooperation. If you see globally, then financing this transition, the energy transition, which is required for combating climate change, is not a macroeconomic problem. Because notwithstanding the pandemic, the world GDP in the last few years has been about 80 trillion per annum, and the saving has been about 20 trillion per annum. As against this, even if we take care of the various estimates which have been used to see how much money is required to fight climate change, they vary between about 650 billion to about $1 trillion US. So that is just about 5% of the global savings, which is certainly not a macroeconomic problem. In fact, I guess, if you take the spending which happens on defense and on subsidizing the fossil fuels, that will probably add up to more than $1 trillion US. The question is that what is the problem? The problem is that most of the saving is in the developed countries, while the funds are required in the developing countries. So we need to see how that flow can happen. Now, certain important things which can ensure that this kind of flow happens. First is that if you see the projects in this sector, because we have funded so many projects, most of the projects which are there in the clean tech sector, whether it is electrical vehicles or renewable energy, they require a very large upfront investment. But after that, the running expenses are very low. So essentially, we need ecosystem where the policies are very predictable. Because if the policies are predictable, then the investors get more confidence and they're willing to fund the sector with a low cost of money. So I think that will be crucial because ultimately we want that the cost of all these projects and the cost of the energy should come down. That is only possible if the cost of funding comes down. And that is very much possible if we have a policy enabler which ensures that all our policies are highly predictable and they're stable. I think that is the requirement number one. The number two requirement is, which is more to do with energy efficiency. So when we talk about climate change, we have to work along both making our energy zero carbon and also on improving the efficiency of way we use energy. So for that, actually the investments required are very small investments, automated investments in the energy efficiency equipment, including small electrical vehicles. I think for that to happen, we have to create the right incentives. We need to have policy to create the right incentives. And probably we have to give some kind of a subsidy at the automized level, at the individual level. I think these two things are extremely important. But the third thing we have to keep in mind is that while all these things will happen over a period of time, but the developing countries like India will still need energy. And that energy partly will have to come through fossil fuels. So we as a world will have to decide how do we create a carbon budget and how do we ensure that we use fossil fuels in a responsible way with a clear plan of phasing them out eventually. So these are some of my brief comments on how we can pay for this, and probably we can have more discussions going forward.
Mr. Chaurasia, thank you very, very much. I particularly like the points that you made at the end, which are for me the perfect segue to lead to Mr. Eric Solheim. Because you mentioned policy interventions. And one that you mentioned was particularly important, the one about incentivization, we all tend to understand. But you mentioned one which I think is particularly important and something that political leaders have to provide. And you mentioned predictability and stability in policies. And I simply agree with you that where capex is high, you have no choice but to ensure that that becomes available. Mr. Solheim, I'm going to turn to you. Obviously, my questions to you have to deal with what politics can deliver and what politics can deliver at an individual level, at levels of countries, and perhaps at global levels. I'll read out the question which has been framed for this particular intervention and your focus, but you can come back to it later. But let me just say this to you. All of these things that we are talking about, whether in business or what was mentioned by Mr. Chaurasia, they basically require buy-in by politics. And then if you require predictability, it means serious, let me say also across the board buy-in by the political very much required. And political leaders especially in democracies, require popular support. So we have to get the question of what is right and what can be accepted, etc., put together on common platforms. And stakeholders, electorates, these are the important elements which you know and I know, all of us coming from democracy, how important it is to bring them along the same platform, even though there might be differences in ideology and different ways of doing things. And so to accelerate this transition, nothing is more important than both political will and, let me say, the segues for this in politics. Mr. Salan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And I've even written a book with the title, Politics is About the Will. So you cannot speak more clearly to me than saying that. But first of all, let me thank you, Annapurna and Terry, for being able to host this event, even under these most difficult circumstances during the pandemic. That's really a great achievement. I've been have the pleasure to visit the Delhi Summit on a number of occasions. So I'm happy to be so happy that you also asked me to join virtually this time. But congrats for being able to pull off this great event. It has been so central in the global conversation about climate and environment over the last 2 decades. Let me start by quoting Lenin, the Russian revolutionary. He once said that there are decades where nothing is happening, and then all of a sudden there are years where decades are happening. And that's exactly where we stand now. A lot more has happened the last year than what happened in decades before that. And look, let me give you a few snapshots. This week, President Moon of South Korea signed off to the by far biggest offshore wind project in the world. The cost is $43 billion US. In Indian terms, 4,300 crores. That's quite a lot of money. And it will bring energy to 3 million homes, which is, of course, an enormous investment. But there's no, as Mr. Shahrar said, there's no lack of money. The money is there, it's just to get the projects right. Well, the week before, President Biden of the United States said that all utility vehicles in the United States will now be electric. And at exactly the same time, General Motors used Super Bowl, which is the biggest event in American sports ever, to put a huge commercial at enormous cost, all about how General Motors will change into electrical vehicles. And the week before that, China pulled off the first big carbon trading system in China, which will very soon be the biggest carbon trading system in the world. So there's so much room for optimism now. Because underlying all this is the economics. Because for the first time in human history, a new development model is possible. The old model was the same everywhere. First we pollute, then when we become rich, we clean up. Now you can integrate economy and ecology right from the beginning, simply because the price of renewable energy is not so low. There is no choice to be made between Mother Earth and jobs and prosperity. Solar energy is now cheaper than any energy has been at any point in human history, and is much cheaper than coal or fossil fuels. So the old, I've been a frequent visitor to India, and the old debate in India was always, do we want to develop or do we want to take care of Mother Earth? And of course, nearly all Indians wanted to develop, as nearly all Europeans would want to develop. But I think Prime Minister Modi has very, very cleverly now parked that old debate and put up the real debate for India, how India can bring everyone out of poverty, create jobs and prosperity, but doing based on the renewable energies and ecotourism, electric vehicles, and all the new technologies which are now available. And look to the big politics of the day. At the UN General Assembly in September, President Xi Jinping of China declared that China will be carbon neutral by 2060. It took 1 month before South Korea and Japan made exactly the same promises. And this is huge because I was visiting China in November, December, and every province, every city is now discussing, every company, all the Huawei's or Tencent's or Alibabas, they're all discussing how can we live up to this expectation from our president. And then China is changing very, very fast. And remind yourself that when you speak about province in China, well, it's like Maharashtra or Uttar Pradesh. This entity is much, much bigger than any nation in Europe. There are 4 Chinese provinces bigger than Germany, for instance. So it really makes headway. Moving on to the United States, President Biden has promised $2 trillion American dollars in investment in renewables, and he's made new environment promises or climate promises by the day. In Europe, the European Union has put the Green New Deal as the center of European development, as a center of European politics, not just as an environment program at the outskirts. And in India, and following Indian news, there is not a day where I don't see a new innovative initiative coming from the grassroots of India. And then also see Prime Minister Modi opening new big solar farms in Madhya Pradesh. The other day, he cut starting tie for the new metro in Agra. I mean, there are developments by the day. India, by the way, has the first all-solar airport in the world in Kochi in Kerala. It's the first all-solar railway station in the world in Assam. So there are so many news, bottom up, but top down, and that's what you need. And we are now at a point in human history where what's important is not really the climate talks. I mean, we need to do them, but it's the political economy. Decisions made by President Xi, Prime Minister Modi, President Biden, and all the global leaders, and it's the business living up to and delivering the technology we need. If we move to business, in most nations, business is now ahead of politics, not hiding behind. When you look to the United States, no nation in the world has made promises like Microsoft. Microsoft has promised to be carbon neutral by 2030. Not even that, it shall be carbon negative. Not even that, they should compensate for all the emissions in the history of Microsoft since 1970. Quite a promise. Added, a promise to be a no plastic company, and added a promise to, with Alaska Airlines, the airlines in Seattle where the headquarters is, to move on how to bring down the emissions from Alaska Airlines and introduce new technologies in the airline industry through incentives coming from Microsoft. I'm just talking about Microsoft, but all the big tech companies in the United States have made similar promises. In Europe, IKEA, the big furniture producer, is in the forefront on the circular economy. Again, from Sweden, like Mr. Stigson, far ahead of any nation when it comes to making the economy circular. And in India, companies like Tata and Mahindra, there are good news coming every day about Indian initiatives also in going green. So I think there is an enormous room for optimism now, because we have the once-in-a-generation chance to get the political economy right. It's not about moving few texts in the United Nations. Manjeev, you have been there, you know this. We need to do it, it's important, but what really counts is the political decisions and business, and that's what we get right now. Finally, I have a theory of change. How do change happen in societies? I believe that change happens when 3 factors come together. The opinion, the people, and let's come back to the discussion of how we can bring everyone on board for the environment, but you need the public opinion telling the political leaders and business, we don't want to live this way any longer, we want change. And then you need brave, visionary political leaders like President Xi, President Modi, and President Biden and Prime Minister Modi to make the political decisions, regulate markets, set up the visions, and subsidize or support what you need. And finally, you need business, because business, no one else can bring change to scale, no one else can bring the technology, no one else can combine economy and ecology, so business. But when public opinion, political leaders, and business are going in the same direction, we will see big change. And this was, by the way, I think what Gandhiji thought of when he said, we need to be the change we want to see in this world. And when people, leaders, and business want to be the change we see in the world, we have an enormous opportunity now.
Mr. Solheim, thank you very much. That was absolutely outstanding, and some of the examples that you gave by themselves should not just cheer but should enthuse most people. And Mr. Stigson, aren't you happy? What you started 20 years back, look at what Mr. Solheim is just mentioning. Surely none of these companies would even have been thinking about these matters 20 years back. Indeed, some of them were almost non-existent at that stage. Today, they are what they are. But the reality is that these are role models. They are very important role models. So when Microsoft says that they'll try and erase their carbon footprint, not just today's, but yesterday's also, it's big news. Remember what their servers are doing. We tend to forget that. The supply chain is perhaps easier to green because it's really about what's happening at the moment. But think about what those servers are doing in various ways. Many people tend to forget how some of these things happen. But Mr. Solheim has touched upon some things which are particularly important. When he says opinion gets formed, the human mind accelerates in that direction. And then you know this is the way forward. Now, let me draw your attention to where we began this conversation. And that was Annapurna telling us what is the big motto behind this WSDS. And she referred to the pandemic. There is no way that any of us would not refer to us. None of you would not refer to it either. One of the things extraordinary manner. Can you all see me? Clear? Clear. There's one thing that we've done in an extraordinary manner which has never happened before in human history, which is the production of vaccines. So what did we do? Finally, we put the human mind on a path which said you have to develop in an accelerated manner. If today we have 5 vaccines and I think we are going towards 10 very soon, without any doubt, it was the human mind which said, get it done. This really takes on from what Mr. Solheim said. Once the opinion is there, once the willingness is there, the human mind comes together. Now, Mr. Stigson, to you, I would ask the question. In continuation of the big question that I said, businesses are certainly going to be the key to it. Perhaps when I speak of business, I also mean, you can call it academia, but let me say the thinking parts of the world, those who have the abilities to invent, to think up new ideas, what else can we do? One of the reasons why for the corona pandemic, we seem to think that we are hitting the right buttons is because in some senses, the world has also been collaborating. Now, it's very nice to hear Mr. Solheim mention things of collaboration. But what can we do to accelerate a little bit more? Because it's one thing to say that we will put up rooftop PV converters, we'll do this. But I think we all recognize that what we really need is more than that, just that. We actually need a new gen of technologies, some different ways of converting the sun's energies for our needs, some other ways of going about it. We are making progresses. Incremental is important. But can we do what we have, for example, done with the 2 vaccines which have not followed the traditional path? What are your takes on this? And please touch upon the issues of intellectual property rights and these kind of matters, because I think they are quite important. We haven't changed the world. The world continues to be the way it is. It's just that the impetus being given to the world today is different. And so we are moving the world in a different direction. And so I look forward to hearing from you, sir.
Well, thank you. Well, in many ways, I think we have changed the world, and we are changing the world. And I think Mr. Solheim made a very good discussion of that. And he talked about the role that business is playing. If we look at the amount of technology development that has been happening in companies and society, we have done a lot. And business is trying to do as much as we can and as quick as we can because it makes business sense. If you want to be the leader in an industry, you have to invent. You have to come up with new solutions and do it quicker than your competition. The competition is driving this, and it's also driving the competition between countries. I was, a number of years ago, I was for rather many years an advisor to the Chinese top leadership, to the State Council. And I was asked by the top leadership in China about their priorities for dealing with a number of these issues. And I said to them that, look, you will not be able to compete in the automotive industry with traditional products because Germany, France, US are too strong for that. But you can compete on electric cars because you can penetrate the Chinese market by making decisions. You have a real chance. You can be the leader on solar. You can do a number of things where you start from scratch in a way that the old economies do not. They have a lot of baggage that they need to deal with in trying to go forward. So I think we are now in a situation where being green, delivering, as I said initially, resource efficient and low polluting solutions is a must if you're going to be competitive in the future. So the question is, how can we, with cooperation between business, and governments and the financial sector, make it even more interesting for the actors to go forward quicker than what we're doing. But a lot is really happening. It's not a long time ago since we did not have electric cars. Well, actually, we had electric cars 100 years ago, but we didn't believe in them. Now we believe in them. So I don't think we should worry that business is not willing to go forward as quick as we can. We are, because that is what makes business sense.
Mr. Stigson, thank you very much. That was a very interesting point which you said, that business is willing to go ahead. And I like that. But let me take you to what Mr. Chaurasia said. It's the movement. Let me draw your attention to something which was said by the Director General of the World Health Organization in the context of COVID vaccines. This is just last week when he mentioned that some 30 million people have been vaccinated and one country, a small country somewhere in the world, has received only 23 doses. He used very strong words, moral, failure, etc. We are not talking of that. But I think the key point that Mr. Chaurasia raised here was the flow. Surely, many great things are happening, perhaps in laboratories, perhaps in companies' workshops, and so many places. But what exactly is happening in terms of taking them to where the vast numbers of this 9 billion people who are there in the world, where they are stationed, and I certainly do talk in terms of the developing world. I am happy that my country today is perhaps in a position to do much of it itself and is willing to put in effort, and we are. But we really look at this collaboration. Mr. Chaurasia, let's hear your views on what you really mentioned as the crux of the issues, the flow.
Sure. So in my view, for these flows to happen, certain institutions have to play a very important role. First is, we have got a number of multilateral institutions, like we have got World Bank, we have got IFC, we have got so many others, we have got green banks, we have got institutions from EU, Proparco is there, OECD countries have various multilateral banks. I think they have a very important role to play in this because as the technologies improve, projects are not viable at the initial stages. So they require various products like first loss guarantee products. So they have to play a very important role. Then because the funding requirement is relatively large and the commercial sector is not comfortable, the commercial banks are not comfortable, we need national green banks who can play a very important role initially. And once they have created a foundation, then the private sector banks can come in and kind of deepen what has already happened. I think the role of these institutions will be extremely important. Apart from that, we already touched on the policy matter. The important thing would be the step, and sometimes it can be challenging because the key challenge which we face in the clean tech sector is that technology is developing very fast, and that is good. But what happens is that power, which was solar power, which was as expensive as 15 rupees in India per unit of power about say 7 to 8 years back, is now down to 2 rupees. But the contracts which were signed that time, that was based on the assumptions that those contracts will be honored for 25 years. But what happens is that when the off-taker sees that the cost of power has come down so much, there's always this tendency to see whether we can renegotiate the contract. Forgetting that time, the reality is very different. So I think these are some of the issues with the improvement in technology, which all the players in the world will face. And there it will be important for us to ensure that we are today to fight the three important pillars that we know are definitely in technology is there. We have made good progress in technology, and touch wood, every day we are making more and more improvement. Now we have battery which is getting cheaper day by day. Hydrogen is becoming more and more viable. Then on the policy side, also a lot of initiatives have been taken. Financing is also coming, but we will have to ensure that there is and people honor contracts, because eventually it is all about enforceability of contracts. And that is as important as improvement in technology. I think if we are able to take care of this, then as was told earlier by Mr. Solayam, that sometimes, in years, in decades, nothing happens, but in certain years, decades can happen. I think we have definitely reached that point.
Thank you. Mr. Solayam, I want to ask you to put on your European hat. India and Europe, not just the EFTA countries, Britain, the EU certainly, are very large and traditional players in the Indian ecosystem. And yes, we built our relations with the United States, with Australia, with Japan, South Korea. But Europe remains very large for us, especially in terms of standard setting, things that we feel comfortable with, etc. Tell me from your experiences, and I think this is a practical kind of question I'm asking you. What do you think are the areas in which, in terms of financing, things in India, these large things that you're talking about, one or two big things which the Tatas may do, they may be able to leverage themselves. But institutionally, do you think, wearing your European hat, you think that continental size economies as we are, India and Europe, we can come together to try and see ways to do or find an answer to, here is a segue to the money. I'm not saying here is the money, but here is a way to reach the money. Are there some specific ideas, etc., which are germinating in your minds of others there? Because I think for people in India also, we need to leave at the end of even our chat some ideas of where people can go.
First, I like to thank India, because what India and, by the way, also China is now doing is remarkable. Sharing vaccine with other developing countries. Frankly, I haven't seen Europe or North America sharing vaccines at this point, because government leaders believe we need it for our own people. And that's a difficult choice also for President Xi or Prime Minister Modi. But seeing India sharing with Sri Lanka, with Bangladesh, with Maldives, with a number of other nations which cannot produce these vaccines themselves, it's simply moving. And the world should thank India for this. It's great service, and that's how we build a common humanity. Secondly, I build upon what Mr. Shirazi has said, because I think he's absolutely right. There is no lack of money, but many investors believe that there is an unacceptable risk in difficult places. An investor may think that it's much more difficult to invest in Nepal than in Sweden. This may or may not be right, but the perception is there, and still make people invest in the safe places, and that they also tend also sometimes to be conservative and invest in the businesses they know from the past. That means, in my view, that all public money, all aid money, all development money, but also the money of the World Bank or all the big institutions should be used as a risk alleviation. They should not do the investment. Investment should be done by the companies. All the big solar companies should invest in the solar industry. I mean, the Tatas or the Mahindras and Reliance or all the other big companies should invest in India. But if there is a perceived added risk, that should be taken by the public money, because then we will get much bigger investment. And very often that risk will not even materialize, because it's just a perceived risk. It's not a real risk. So that's the core. And just one other comment, because you brought up a key issue, and that's how to bring people with us. And the most damaging for climate and environment is if we get polarized societies, like in the United States, where every young woman in San Francisco or New York is green, while basically older people on the countryside in Wyoming or Oklahoma all voted for President Trump. When Trump got 10% in San Francisco, he got 90% of in the white countryside in America. It's such a divide, and we need to bring these together. Otherwise, the pathway to environment will be very difficult. I believe at the core to that is to bring up the win-win concept. There are many more jobs to be had if we move into the solar industry. In the United States, there are 5 times more jobs in the solar industry than there is in coal. Because in India, millions upon millions of jobs can be created if we get it right, and India is moving into the green shift with dedication. And then we can bring people on board, because it's good for the environment, but it's also good for their salaries, for their jobs, for the economic future of their children, and of course for the community with less pollution and a better health. So it's win-win-win propositions. That's the way to bring everyone on board, whether they are old or young, green or not so green.
Mr. Chairman, could I make a brief comment?
Please do, before we ask Annapurna to look at others. But Mr. Stigson, you always have the floor.
Yeah, I think it's great that we are optimistic about the changes, and we talk about the things that will come from this. But as I said in my initial comment, we are going through a very substantial change in society. And in this change, there will be winners, and we talk a lot about that, but there will also be losers. And the losers are going to resist change. Don't underestimate that. If you are a big oil company today, you are not necessarily believing that solar energy is the best thing that has happened to them. So we have to understand the checks and balances that are there in making this work. And the progressive part of business is moving forward, but there is also businesses that see themselves as losers in this, and they are not cheering. So that's why we see the polarization also in the political circles in some countries like the United States. Let's not forget that. So we don't become over-optimistic and then become disappointed. We have to deal with the losers as well.
Mr. Stigson, you made some wonderful points, very important. And I'll tell you, just focusing for a second or two on United States elections, I think those figures are not exactly representing the winners and losers, because whoever may have been the candidate of the Republican Party would have won 60 million votes. And whoever would have been the candidate of the Democrats would have also got that. It's only the differential. So, you know, Mr. Sola, it isn't that all guys went, they would have gone with whoever was the Republican. But, let's leave that. I think there's a very important point which Mr. Stixon has made. It is my understanding that in the developing world, the have-nots have benefited hugely from globalization. In the developed world, the haves have benefited from globalization. And so of course, there's no have-not in the developed world, but the so-called relative have-nots, they feel that globalization has, in a sense, taken away what should have been their due. In the old days, we used to talk in terms of, one country racing ahead. Soon, people like us, India, etc., many would come in the way. But that's a subject for another completely different debate, a very fascinating and wonderful debate of whether it is really a case of whether globalization or not. And does the change in the United States reflect that? But we look at it. Annapurna, there is another channel which must be taking in what people are saying. I'm sorry I'm not getting it, but I leave it to you to ask a few questions.
Thank you, Ambassador Puri. There is a question based on Mr. Solaim's comment that we, India, have much cheaper green renewable options now. And what the delegate is saying, can the reduction of reliance on fossil fuel, be done exponentially in a downward spiral as green tech evolves and becomes even cheaper?
Annapurna, are there any one or two other questions along the same lines?
Yes, and connected to that is what is the future of renewable energy in India while focusing on solar, wind, and biomass? That's one more question. And then we have a question which says, what are some of the best possibilities or areas where both urban and rural people can be involved in order to contribute to the fight against climate change? So how do we bring in the rural? Thank you.
Thank you. I think that she's made one very important point, which is inclusion. I think it's young and old, it's across continents, but for continental sized societies like India, it's also within our societies. And I take you back to Mr. Björn Stigson's point, as well as Eric Solheim's point, rural, urban, and so on and so forth. I think this is a very, very important point, inclusion. How do we get everybody's mind working on inclusion? Other areas which are specific areas for renewable energies, Manishji, I'm sure you'll have some ideas since you are sitting here in India. But let's hear something about inclusion. Mr. Solheim.
Yeah, I think, again, the most important is the win-win propositions. Always look for the policies which are good both for the economy and for environment at the same time. Tourism is the biggest job creator in the world these days. How to make the benefit of the wonderful, beautiful nature of India, how to create national parks. Just in the last year, India has opened 5 new wetlands, 5 new Ramsar sites. That's a way to also build green tourism around it. So you create jobs, and that will very often be rural jobs. I mean, the tigers of India are not in Delhi and Mumbai. They are in Maharashtra or Madhya Pradesh or Rajasthan or in Assam, and you can attract a lot of tourists based on that. And of course, the change into the solar renewable economy is a huge opportunity for India, again, to create jobs. You in India now have the lowest prices of solar in the world. China has much more solar energy than India at this point, but the price is now the lowest in India, and the price of solar in India is cheaper than any other energy in human history. But of course, you need to work together, governments and business, to really get the benefit of this. I mean, for instance, for a business to really benefit from the solar, you need a grid, which tend to be and you tend to need governments to make the grid system work. So there are lots of opportunities to work together, but opportunities for jobs, for progress in India is remarkable here. Let me finally say that because the countryside is as important as the cities. Agriculture needs to change. Here, India has a huge advantage. I mean, India is the home of vegetarianism in the world. No other place in the world so many people are vegetarian. And we don't want to be vegetarian, all of us. but we need to reduce the consumption of meat. And India can set an example, because I know of no other place with so tasty vegetarian meals than you can have in India. I will indeed have it with some friends tonight. So from a takeaway restaurant here in Oslo. So to look, and of course agriculture need to change. Tree planting is essential. China is well ahead on tree planting, but India can pick up. Again, look to all the opportunities for people, rather than saying that this is a kind of choice between environment and economy. There's no such choice any longer. Then we bring people on board.
Mr. Solheim, thank you very much for reminding us that the proof of all puddings lies in its eating. We shall take it from there onwards. Mr. Chaurasia, do you have something to say about rural people, rural economies? India obviously has a focus, but all over the world. And then I'll come to Mr. Stigson, who really made this point in terms of the world and the Western world in particular, and where, you know, this rural-urban divide, in fact, you've seen in the recent election in the United States. You have something to say, please add. Mr. Chaurasia. Are you there, Mr. Chaurasia? Mr. Manish Chaurasia? No, I think we've lost him. Mr. Stigson, let's hear from you. This is a very interesting concept.
Yes, and I think that as I've said now a couple of times, it is crucial for the world. It's crucial for the global society that we are able to deal with the environmental challenges, deal with climate change. But let's not fool ourselves that means that everybody is going to benefit and be better, have a better situation for that. There will be winners and losers. There's a lot of money invested in coal power, also in India. There is new coal power being built in many places, including in India, including in China. There's a lot of oil and other fossil fuels then also being invested in the world. We are not there yet, where everybody feels that it's the right and best thing for them to change. And that's our big challenge. We know that we have to change. We know that we have to go green. And we see that there are very good technologies and other things coming. But there are also big stumbling blocks. And one of the stumbling blocks is the financial sector, because they are not as green as we like to believe. The financial sector is now kind of a stumbling block to really move forward fast. And I say that also in Sweden. If you go and look for banks that have greened themselves, they are not necessarily there on every street.
Mr. Stigson, that was wonderful. Despite the fact that all bucks are green, you said that they are not green enough. I like that very much. Mr. Chaurasia, we lost you for a minute, but you're back.
Yeah.
Please tell us, how do we make the bucks green? For a few minutes, because then we are coming to the end of this session. We have a time limitation. So very shortly, if you have something to say about taking everyone together.
Sure. So, so this is a very pertinent point. And we have rural India and urban India. And, you know, both these Indias have to move together. So one area through which we can do this, and which is a low-hanging fruit, in my view, is the solar rooftop. Solar rooftop is where you use solar on the top of a roof to generate energy for your own house. Now, this is something which has been a feasible technology for a long time. But going forward, this will become even more easy to implement and even more viable because the cost of storage has been coming down. So we spoke about the battery. The cost of battery has been coming down by about 10 to 15. So I think it's a matter of time when we will see a situation where the cost of storage plus the cost of generation from solar will become lower than the cost. And in my view, that will be the point of disruption. And I think that is one area which will benefit both rural India in terms of benefiting the farmers by generating additional income for them. And Government of India also has a scheme for them. And at the same time, this will be very beneficial for the urban India, because they'll be able to use their roof to generate power and they'll be able to benefit from the low cost power. I think that is something which is definitely a low hanging fruit. And in my view, it has got a great future.
Thank you.
In any case, when it comes to India, there was a question that whether renewable energy will grow fast in India and whether it will really exponentially take over. That is definitely going to happen. There's going to be a point of disruption for the same reason which I said a little earlier, that eventually the cost of solar plus the cost of battery will come down below the cost of thermal, because the cost of thermal is increasing while that of battery and solar has been coming down. And that point will be a point of disruption, because then you can have solar, which has very reliable power. Today, the key challenge is that you can have solar only when the sunlight is there. Once that problem is solved through storage, then that will be a point of great disruption.
Mr. Chaurasia, thank you very much. We have 3 minutes. Annapurna, if there's a rapid fire question with you, one, in which all the panelists can say yes and no, please fire away. Anything, one question, just fire away.
No, Ambassador Puri, we don't have any other questions.
We have just 3 minutes, sir. Let me ask all of you to use this opportunity to use 30 seconds and say one thing to the world on what you said. We have to take everyone together, and we know that everyone may not feel very comfortable, but the choice is one only, and that is you need to move in a particular direction. To this, let me hear from you all, sir, within 30 seconds, little message for everyone, and then we move on to the big inaugural of the day. Let me start with you, Mr. Chaurasia. From India, both of us from our hearts.
Yeah, the message I want to give is that climate change it requires a global solution. And now it is no longer in the realm of fantasy. There are enough scientific evidence that this warming is happening because of human activity. And together we have to solve this problem.
Thank you. Very important. We all are in it together. Mr. Solheim.
We should forget the old debate where economists said the economy is most important, and then green people said no, Mother Earth and nature is most important, and bring these together into ecology and economy at the same time. Then we find the win-win solutions, good for the economy, good for jobs, and good for planet and Mother Earth. And India really has the chance to lead the world in this direction, be a continent or a nation, whatever term you want to use, but be the place where you see up to 10% economic growth, bring people on board, but you base it on technologies which are kind to the planet.
Very true. Thank you very much. Very well said. I think many of us will take you on. Björn Stigson, the person who joined Terry in taking all of this off. Sir, before I end, the floor is yours.
Thank you. We've come a long way, but we are not yet there. And we need to bring people with us if we're going to succeed. We either succeed or we fail together if we are not able to bring the others with us. But that is a real challenge, and I don't have the solution. How do we bring some of the real questions from people that don't believe that what we are saying is true? That is the challenge. It can be done, and it will be the people that believe in this and understand it will go forward. But we also need to deal with the people that are going to try not to move forward.
Mr. Stigson, thank you very much. 2 years back, celebrated Indian author Amitava Ghosh wrote this very beautiful book, which I don't know how many of you have read, The Great Derangement. It was about climate change. We can't let that run the world for us. We are all in agreement that climate and sustainable development is the way forward we must go. And I believe the world is ready, and I believe very strongly that my country, and thank you very much for acknowledging India's leadership role, our leaders' roles in this. Thank you very much for acknowledging this. I believe that we will play our role in shaping a better, a greener world order, which is to the benefit of all of them. As you said, Mr. Solheim, win, win, and win. The next session is really very important. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned That's the inaugural session. The Honorable Prime Minister of India will inaugurate. We have the President of Guyana there, the Prime Minister from Papua New Guinea, the Deputy Secretary General of the UN, the Speaker of the Majlis from Maldives. The world is in fact coming together. And after that, a more focused session on rebooting growth. Annapurna, to you and to your team, a very big thank you from my side. I dare say I have the permission of the three panelists. Thank you very much, and all power to the elbows of Terry. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Manjeev Puri. Thank you, all the speakers, Mr. Eric Solam, Professor Dr. Björn Stigson, and Mr. Manish Chaurasia. Thank you very much for such an absorbing, engrossing, and how all of you brought this entire discussion. It was such a compelling discussion. Thank you very much, and we are so glad that we could have this fireside chat. Thank you all, and we meet again at 6:30.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All the best.